I let my stepmother move in to help care for my dying father. It felt like the right thing to do. But after he passed, she looked me in the eye and said everything: the house, the accounts, even his company now belonged to her. What she didn't know was that I had the original will, and I was never going to let her get away with it. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 36 years old. I've built a quiet but fulfilling life in Manhattan, working as a lead architect at an urban design firm. I love my work, every detail, every blueprint, every line drawn with purpose. I'm not married. I don't have kids, but I've always felt that my life had meaning, structure, stability, precision. Maybe that's why this story still shakes me. Because no matter how carefully you build your world, some people will always find a way to crawl through the cracks, especially when they share your blood. Or worse, when they've married into it. My father, Gerald Harper, was everything to me. He wasn't perfect, far from it. He was stubborn, a bit cold on the outside, and more in love with his company than with any hobby or second wife. But to me, he was still Dad. The man who built a real estate empire from scratch. The one who read blueprints like bedtime stories when I was little. The one who gave me my first sketchbook and said, "Don't just live in the world, Evelyn, shape it." He raised me alone after my mother died. I was 10. Those years weren't easy, just the two of us. We learned how to live with the silence, with the grief, with the absence of someone we both missed in different ways. He did his best. I did mine. And when I left for college, we didn't say "I love you" the way some families do, but we never really lost each other. Until she came. Her name was Marissa. She was charming, well-spoken, warm in the way that makes people trust too quickly. And she was nearly 20 years younger than my father. They met at a charity gala. I remember the photo in the paper. He was in a navy suit. She wore emerald green, her smile too wide. I knew right then something was wrong, but I said nothing. They got married a year later. I kept my distance. Our calls became less frequent. I visited once or twice a year, always brief, always polite. We kept things civil, and that's how I liked it. But that peace shattered the day I got the call. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months? Maybe less. I packed a bag that night. I told my firm I needed personal leave, and I drove 5 hours north to the house where I grew up. He looked so small in that hospital bed, tucked into the corner of his sunlit study. The man who once shook hands with developers and skyscrapers, now struggling to lift a glass of water. I kissed his forehead, and I whispered, "I'm here, Dad." He squeezed my hand. Didn't say much, but he didn't need to. We never did. I moved in that same day, brought work files, clothes, my laptop, and after a long conversation, I invited Marissa to move in too. Because despite everything, I thought, he needs all the care he can get. Maybe she's not who I'd choose, but I'm not here to start a war. I thought that. I really did. What I didn't realize was that the war had already begun. I just hadn't seen the weapons yet. If you've ever had to protect someone you love from someone you once trusted, if you've ever felt something was wrong, but everyone told you to stay quiet, then stay with me. This isn't just a story about a will. It's about silence. It's about boundaries. It's about what happens when the person who wears the mask of family turns out to be the one holding the knife. Subscribe for more stories where silence speaks louder than words. The first week went by like a soft blur. Between hospice nurses, doctor visits, medication schedules, and late-night silences, I didn't have the energy to think about anything beyond my father's next breath. Marissa was, on the surface, helpful. She made tea in the mornings, brought fresh towels, reminded me to eat. She touched my arm gently when I looked too tired. And every night, after tucking a blanket over Dad's legs, she'd whisper, "We're in this together, Evelyn." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But there were little things, subtle things, things that wouldn't have meant anything if they hadn't added up so quickly. Like how the nurses began reporting directly to her, not me. How the new visiting doctor she personally hired would only speak to her unless I asked directly. How the mail started arriving in a new basket, one she kept in her room. She said it was to stay organized. Or how one afternoon, I returned from the pharmacy to find she'd rearranged the kitchen cabinets. The old layout didn't make sense. She smiled. This way, the medications are easier to access. It wasn't a big deal, but it was our kitchen, my father's kitchen. The one I used to bake birthday cakes in. Another morning, I walked into Dad's study to find his desk drawers open. Marissa was thumbing through folders. "Oh, sorry," she laughed softly. "Just looking for his insurance paperwork. You know how men are. They never label anything." She closed the drawer gently, but I noticed something was missing. The red leather folder, the one he always kept on the bottom left, was gone. When I asked about it, she tilted her head. "Are you sure it was there?" And I felt foolish for doubting myself. Maybe I was just tired. A few days later, she had dinner delivered from his favorite Italian place, the one they used to go to on anniversaries. I smiled politely. She raised her glass and said, "To Gerald. And to family. All of us. All of us." The words echoed. After dinner, I stayed behind to clean the dishes. Marissa walked upstairs humming softly, her heels clicking gently against the wood. I found myself staring at the hallway where our family portraits used to hang. They were gone, replaced by minimalist art, abstract pieces. Clean, cold. I checked the hallway closet. The old photos were in a box, labeled sentimental clutter. I should have said something, but I didn't, because Dad needed peace. And I thought, maybe I was just being territorial. Maybe this was her way of coping. Until the night she called me selfish. It was subtle, so casual. It almost slipped past me. We were sitting on the back porch. She sipped her wine, staring into the darkness, and said, "You know, Evelyn, it must be so freeing to not have anyone relying on you. No husband, no kids, just your own life, your own choices. It's such a privilege to be able to drop everything and come here." She smiled sweetly, then added, "Not everyone has that luxury." I sat still, letting her words wash over me, and suddenly, the night felt colder. It wasn't just a comment, it was a message. I wasn't sacrificing enough. I wasn't soft enough. I wasn't like her. And maybe that made me less human in her eyes. The shift was slow, measured, almost elegant. One afternoon, I found that my father's calendar, the one where we tracked his medication and visitors, had been replaced. Gone were the handwritten notes. In their place, a glossy printed schedule in Marissa's handwriting. At the bottom it read, "All questions to be directed to Marissa Harper, primary caregiver." Primary caregiver, not coordinator, not support, not partner, just her. I didn't say anything that day. I didn't want to cause friction in front of my father, but I felt something inside me flicker. A quiet warning. A few days later, I came back from a walk to find our longtime nurse, Jenny, packing her bag. "Is everything okay?" I asked. She looked uncomfortable. "I've been reassigned," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Marissa said the family requested a different nurse." "The family," I repeated. She meant herself. Jenny paused, then gave me a sad smile. "She told me not to bother you. Said you were too emotional right now." Too emotional. I clenched my fists so tightly, my nails dug into my palms. Jenny left that evening. A new nurse arrived the next morning, younger, quieter, and oddly distant. She barely made eye contact with me. "Just doing what I'm told," she said once when I asked her about Dad's vitals. I was asked to report directly to Mrs. Harper. Mrs. Harper. Marissa. Then came the mail. I'd always handled my father's bills ever since he had his first surgery a year ago. But suddenly, statements stopped arriving. I checked with the bank. All billing addresses had been updated to a P.O. box I didn't recognize. When I asked Marissa, she looked genuinely surprised. "Oh, I thought you knew," she said, placing a teacup down gently. "Your father asked me to streamline things. Less stress for everyone. That's what we agreed on." My father, the man who insisted on reading every contract line by line, who handwrote checks for the gardener because online banking feels like gambling, that man wanted streamlining. It didn't add up. But still, I said nothing. I told myself I needed to pick my battles. That this wasn't about me. That Dad deserved calm. And then came the locks. One night, after brushing my teeth, I noticed the study door was closed, locked. It had never been locked. Not once in 30 years. I knocked. Gently, no response. Marissa opened it 5 minutes later, smoothing her blouse. "Sorry," she said. "I was organizing some of Gerald's legal files. He asked me to—" "Why is the door locked?" I asked. Her smile didn't falter. "Well, some of those papers are private. I figured it was best to keep everything secure." I looked past her. The red folder was back, but stacked under new manila envelopes I'd never seen before. I said nothing. Again. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The next morning, I tried to speak with my father alone. He was awake, seated by the window. The late autumn sun warmed his face, but his skin looked thinner than ever. I sat beside him. "Dad," I whispered, "I think we need to talk." He looked at me, eyes hazy, but he reached out, touched my hand. That gesture so familiar, so human. But just as I began to speak, Marissa appeared at the doorway. "Oh, Gerald," she said brightly. "Time for your hydration." She walked in, tray in hand, gently inserted herself between us, offered him water, fluffed his blanket. I stood. I was in the middle of course, she interrupted. "But the doctor said hydration intervals can't be delayed." "You understand." I clenched my jaw, and I left. That night, I found the hallway light left on, the same hallway where the portraits used to hang. They were still gone, but this time, something new had replaced them. 3 large canvases, all of them empty, blank white, minimalist art. She'd say, but I saw it for what it was, a silent erasure, a clean slate. And in that moment, I realized she wasn't just living here, she was replacing us. It was a Tuesday morning when the first true alarm rang in my head. I was sitting at the dining table, reviewing emails from work, trying to stay connected, to feel useful, when I noticed a name I didn't recognize on a voicemail transcription. Attorney Liam Granger. The message was brief. Just a request for a callback regarding recent documents executed under Mr. Gerald Harper's name. I frowned. Liam Granger wasn't my father's lawyer. In fact, I'd never heard the name before. I played the message twice. His tone was polite, neutral, but there was something clipped in his voice. Something that hinted at formality, even distance. I asked Marissa about it later that day, as we folded laundry together in the den. "Oh, yes," she said without hesitation. "Gerald wanted a second opinion on some estate planning updates. Mr. Granger came highly recommended by a friend of mine." "Estate planning," I repeated. She gave me a gentle smile. "Well, you know, just updating things. Wills, trusts. You know how it is when someone gets sick. It makes you think about these things." I nodded slowly, but my stomach turned, because I did know how my father thought about those things. And he would never, not in a million years, make estate changes without at least mentioning them to me. He wasn't that kind of man. Later that evening, I stood outside his room, waiting for the nurse to finish her routine. When I entered, he was awake, barely, eyes dull, but alert. I pulled up a chair, sat beside him. "Dad," I whispered. "Who's Liam Granger?" He blinked slowly. I could see the effort it took to move his eyes toward me. His lips parted. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Just a weak breath. I touched his hand. "Did you ask him to change anything?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He blinked again. I couldn't tell if it meant yes, or no, or I don't know anymore. Before I could ask again, Marissa entered the room with a humidifier tray and her ever-present smile. "Hydration and air quality," she said, placing it beside the bed. "Doctor's orders." She glanced at me, then at my father. "Was everything okay in here?" I stood. "Yes," I said, "just talking." She smiled at my father and kissed his forehead. "Well, let's not tire him out too much. Sweetheart." Sweetheart. The word made my teeth ache. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and stared out into the backyard where I used to play as a child. In the reflection of the glass door, I saw myself a grown woman, supposedly strong and capable, and I realized just how small I felt in that house now. I felt like a ghost, a visitor, a threat. The next day, while Marissa was out running errands, I took a risk. I entered the study, the same one she had locked days before. The door was open this time, but the desk drawers were still locked. Except for one. Inside was a manila folder labeled Pending Transfers. I flipped it open quickly, heart pounding. Inside were copies of property deeds, a transfer of stock authority, bank account beneficiary changes, all drafted within the past 3 weeks, all with Marissa's name on them. Not co-trustee, not executor, not even guardian, just her. Alone. I heard the front door close. I shoved the folder back, closed the drawer, and stepped out of the study like nothing happened. She was humming again. That same quiet hum, like everything was fine. But nothing was fine. Not anymore. The next morning, I went into the town center under the pretense of running errands. Instead, I drove straight to the old law office where my father's longtime attorney, Mr. Bishop, had worked for decades. His name was no longer on the sign. But the receptionist remembered me. He retired 2 months ago, she said. Moved down to Florida. Lovely man. I asked if he had referred anyone to handle my father's affairs. She checked her files. No, she said. Actually, your father canceled everything with our office, sent a termination letter and asked us to release all records. About 6 weeks ago, just before the first signs of his illness had shown. Just after I remember Marissa spending long hours with him, going over documents. I thanked the receptionist and walked out into the November wind, cold slicing through my coat. I didn't know exactly what I was dealing with yet, but I knew this. Someone was rewriting my father's life and possibly his legacy right under my nose, and I wasn't going to let it happen quietly. The first thing I did when I got back to the house was walk past Marissa without a word. She was in the living room arranging flowers. Fresh roses for Gerald's room, she chirped. The doctor says smell helps with memory. I nodded stiffly and went upstairs, clutching my coat sleeve to hide my shaking hand. Up until that point, everything had been circumstantial. Too many changes, too much control, too many secrets cloaked in smiles. But the visit to my father's former attorney's office that changed something. It gave weight to the suspicion. It made it real. I went into the guest room, the one I'd turned into a makeshift office, and opened my laptop. I began searching public records, real estate transfers, corporate ownership filings, estate documents filed through probate channels. And there it was. 3 documents with active filings under Marissa Harper's name. One showed intent to assume full management rights over G.H. Holdings, my father's company. Another listed her as primary beneficiary on a life insurance policy I had no idea existed. The third was a preliminary deed adjustment, naming her sole holder of my father's estate. Pending final signature. All of it was pending, still unofficial, still reversible. But for how long? That night, I lay awake in the dark guest room, listening to the quiet creak of pipes in the walls and the occasional cough from down the hall. And I remembered something. A conversation from over a year ago. I had come home for Father's Day, and we'd shared coffee on the back patio. Out of nowhere, my dad said, "Someday, Evelyn, I may not be able to say what needs saying, but there'll be a folder, bottom left drawer of my desk, red leather. You'll know it when you see it." At the time, I thought it was about taxes, or maybe instructions for burial. But now I understood what he meant. And I realized the red folder wasn't just misplaced, it was hidden. I waited until the next morning. At 7:30, Marissa left for a wellness session she'd recently joined, her new self-care ritual. The moment her car disappeared down the street, I moved. I entered my father's study, locked the door behind me, and went straight to the lowest drawer on the left. It was empty, but something felt off. I knocked gently against the wooden floor of the drawer. It sounded hollow. I lifted the lining paper carefully, slowly, and found a small hidden compartment underneath. There it was. Red leather, worn at the edges. No label, no name. I opened it. Inside were several pages, all typed, all signed. The first, a will, dated 14 months ago, witnessed, notarized. It left 90% of the estate to me, 5% to charity. 5% in a limited fund to support Marissa for 5 years in gratitude for companionship and care. There were personal notes. 2. Scanned images of handwritten letters, one addressed to me. Evelyn, if you're reading this, it means something went wrong. You always saw things clearly. You always protected what mattered. Do it again. Love. Dad. I stared at the page for what felt like an hour. Then I closed the folder and tucked it inside a fireproof case I kept in my luggage. That night, I didn't sleep, but I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Clarity. There was a line now, drawn, not just in my mind, but on paper, with ink, and my father's signature. The next morning, I woke early, not from an alarm, but from the kind of clarity that slices through exhaustion. I knew what I had to do, for the first time in weeks. I moved through the house with intention. Marissa was still asleep, or at least pretending to be, her bedroom door shut, the hallway quiet. I didn't care. I walked out to the garage and opened my old storage chest. Among boxes of blueprints and dusty books was a small black pouch. Inside, a discreet voice recorder, a set of mini document cameras, and most importantly, a slimline USB backup drive. Years ago, I'd helped a close friend through a legal battle involving stolen architectural plans. What I learned during that mess stuck with me. Never confront first. Document. Protect. Then strike. That morning, I planted a small voice recorder inside the study bookshelf, tucked behind a row of law journals my father had never really read. I placed a second one in the hallway, concealed behind the baseboard of the console table. They ran silently, motion activated. No blinking lights. No beeps. Just silence. By lunchtime, Marissa was in full performance mode again. She brought tea to my room. Chamomile with a hint of honey. Always so thoughtful. I've scheduled a lawyer to come by tomorrow, she said. Setting the cup down, I looked up from my laptop. A lawyer, she nodded. Just to finalize a few things. Gerald wanted everything to be tidy. You know, he hated chaos. Which lawyer? Liam Granger, she said, sipping from her own cup. You'll like him. Very professional. I smiled slightly. Funny. He's never spoken to me about any of this. She gave a light laugh. Well, dear, not everything has to go through you. That was the moment I knew she wasn't guessing anymore. She believed I was out of the way. Irrelevant. Background. And that was exactly where I needed her to keep me. After she left, I opened my email and contacted an old colleague, Nia, a forensic analyst who specialized in digital signatures and document validation. I sent her 2 attachments. The scanned version of the new will I had downloaded from the public probate records site, and a photo of the original my father's true will signed, sealed, and notarized. She wrote back within 2 hours. There are inconsistencies. The signature on the new document has tremor lines inconsistent with Gerald Harper's earlier samples. Pressure distribution suggests either cognitive impairment or coercion. If this goes to court, I'm willing to testify. I stared at the email. Coercion. The word felt heavy, cold. Final. I didn't just suspect it now. I had expert analysis. The next step was proof in motion. That evening, I waited until Marissa was in the living room, watching some dramatized medical show she pretended to enjoy. I walked to the back of the house, into the den, the room that once housed Dad's cigar collection. Now it was Marissa's project space. I opened a small file cabinet she had moved in 2 weeks ago. The top drawer was locked, but the second wasn't. Inside were real estate pamphlets, loan documents, and a printed itinerary. The destination, Barbados. The reservation, 2 adults, beachfront suite, date. 2 months from now. I scanned the name of the second guest. Not Gerald, and not me. Just an initial, R. Jensen. I took photos of everything. Then I locked the drawer again exactly as I had found it and walked out without making a sound. The next day, while she left for her lawyer meeting, I copied the camera footage from the hallway. At exactly 8:43 p.m. the night before, she'd walked into Dad's study with a folder, stayed 23 minutes, came out with nothing in hand. She'd been reshuffling papers, maybe hiding more, maybe destroying what didn't fit her plan. But it didn't matter, because now I was ahead of her. Now I had evidence. A digital trail, a paper trail, a voice print, and something she would never expect. A sister's intuition sharpened by grief, and a daughter's memory that never forgets. By the end of that week, I had a system. Every morning before sunrise, I downloaded audio clips from the motion-activated recorders. Every evening, I reviewed copies of financial documents I'd either photographed or discreetly printed from Marissa's shared office computer when she wasn't around. She had no password. Too confident. Too careless. On Thursday night, around 12 p.m., I caught her voice on the recorder near the study. She wasn't alone. The voice was male, muffled maybe on speakerphone. Marissa. No, I told you. It's almost done. She's not a threat. She's just lingering. Once the probate clears, I'll wire the full amount. Pause. Then laughter. I know. No, she doesn't suspect a thing. She's too wrapped up in grief. Poor Evelyn. So loyal. So lonely. I replayed the audio 3 times. Not because I didn't believe it, but because hearing my name said like that made something inside me harden. The softness I'd held onto the naive hope that maybe she was just overstepping. Not outright scheming vanished. She was lying. Playing everyone. And worst of all, she enjoyed it. I forwarded the clip to Naya, who was now helping me build a timeline, one that traced not just the falsified documents, but also Marissa's increasing isolation of my father in the months before his decline. Nia flagged something I had missed. Check the notarization dates. There's a sudden cluster of activity within 5 days, including real estate, company shares, and healthcare directives. No attorney would process that volume during a client's cognitive decline, unless someone was pushing hard. I went back to the home security footage from that week. One clip showed Marissa walking a mobile notary out the front door carrying what looked like a leather-bound notary stamp. Date and time matched. Dad was already bedridden at that point. I had a copy of his medical log. He was sedated twice that day. I pulled up the nurse's note. Mr. Harper nonverbal, responsive to touch, unable to form full sentences, no signs of distress, and yet he signed 3 binding documents that afternoon. My stomach turned. This wasn't just manipulation, it bordered on abuse. That night, I opened the red leather folder again. I read every page carefully, looking for anything my father might have hidden, a detail, a name, a reference. There, near the end of the document, was a slip of paper, taped to the inside lining, not typed, handwritten. It was a list of names and dates, most of them meaningless, except one. Bernard Royce, 3 p.m., August 12, backup copy. Bernard was my father's oldest friend. They'd been in the Marines together. He lived about an hour outside Boston, a quiet man with a house full of locked cabinets and unopened letters. I hadn't seen him in years, but I remembered his voice. Firm, fair, dryly funny. I called him the next morning. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Evelyn, he said. I was wondering when you'd call. I didn't even ask how he knew. I just said, I need to come see you. It's about my father. You should have come sooner, he replied. But yes, come. I drove up that afternoon. Bernard met me at the front door with a manila envelope in hand. He didn't ask for explanations, didn't offer tea or stories. He simply said, your father gave me this in August, told me to hold it until either you asked for it or something smelled off. I opened the envelope on the hood of my car. Inside was a USB drive and a notarized letter. The letter confirmed what I already knew, the true will, the timeline, the motive. But the USB held something more valuable. It was a video, grainy, but clear. My father in the study, speaking slowly, but clearly. This is Gerald Harper. Today is August 12th. I am of sound mind. I am recording this to state my intentions regarding my estate. I have updated my will. It has been witnessed and notarized. Any future documents contradicting this version should be considered invalid unless verified in person. With my full capacity acknowledged by my attending physician, I stood there, wind catching my coat, listening to the one voice I hadn't truly heard in weeks. And I felt everything inside me shift. My father knew. He had prepared for this. He trusted me to find the truth. And now I had it. I thanked Bernard, drove home in silence, and made 3 backup copies of the video. Then I placed the original USB in the fireproof case next to the red leather folder. War had been declared. She just didn't know she'd already lost. That night, I didn't sleep. Not out of fear. Not anymore. But because my mind was wide awake. Constructing a map of every lie, every manipulated detail, every signature that Marissa had gathered like weapons. I knew what I had. My father's original will. A notarized witness letter. A time-stamped video of sound mind. Audio clips implicating Marissa in financial coercion. Evidence of altered estate documents created during his cognitive decline. But I also knew something else. Winning legally wasn't enough. I needed her to be exposed. To everyone. Not just in court, but in the court of family, of community, of legacy. Because she didn't just want money, she wanted position. She wanted to erase me and write herself into the center of his story. The first thing I did was contact Liam Granger's firm posing as a potential client. His assistant, Jenna, was surprisingly open. We've done several estate reviews for Mrs. Harper recently. She's very thorough. Does she usually handle things directly? Oh yes. Jenna chuckled. She's detailed, but friendly. And Mr. Harper. A pause. I never actually met him, she said. All the documents came through her. I thanked her, then hung up. The next day, I reached out to a private investigator. I gave him a list of properties and a name. R. Jensen. He called back 2 days later. Richard Jensen, real estate consultant. Divorced. Filed Chapter 13 last year. Recently seen with Marissa Harper at a luxury auction in Manhattan. I have photos. Proof of her wellness retreats being spent in high heels beside a man with hungry eyes. I added that to the folder. Back home, I began staging the final layer. I created a secured Google Drive with all the documentation, each file named clearly, labeled by date, organized into 3 folders: legal, medical, audiovisual. Then I wrote an email, short and precise, addressed to 3 people: Liam Granger, Gerald's physician, Dr. Pollard, the estate mediator appointed by the probate court. Subject line: urgent. Discrepancy in legal filings for Gerald Harper. Inside the body, I wrote, I am Evelyn Harper, daughter of Mr. Gerald Harper. Attached is a folder containing certified documents and recordings suggesting unauthorized estate modifications conducted during a period of medical vulnerability. I request an immediate hold on all current proceedings pending legal review. Video testimony and forensic analysis included. I scheduled it. Not to send immediately, but to send automatically in 48 hours unless manually canceled. It was my failsafe. Because I knew something Marissa didn't. She was planning to move quickly. That evening, over dinner, she brought it up casually, like discussing a garden renovation. The lawyer is ready for final signatures tomorrow, she said, stirring her soup. It's really just a formality now. I smiled. That's great. I'm glad Dad's affairs will be clean. She didn't flinch. I always knew you'd come around. Evelyn, you're smart enough to know when resistance is pointless. She said that while cutting bread, her hands steady, her tone motherly. She thought I was finished, crushed, and I let her think that. The next morning, I dressed in black slacks and a cream blouse, subtle, sharp, and sat with Dad during breakfast. He was awake, eyes brighter than they'd been in days. I whispered softly into his ear, Dad, I found it all. Everything. You were right. I know what she did. He blinked twice. That was all I needed. At 11 a.m., Marissa's lawyer arrived. Tall, crisp suit, expensive briefcase. I greeted him at the door, handed him a coffee, and asked to speak privately before they began. He agreed. In the study, I placed a printed copy of the red folder on the desk. This, I said, is the actual will, notarized, witnessed, filed separately with a private party. He raised an eyebrow. I placed a USB on top. And this is Mr. Harper, on video, declaring full capacity, dated August 12th. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, why are you giving this to me? Because if you proceed with Marissa's version after seeing this, I said calmly. You will be complicit and disbarred. He studied my face, then slowly picked up the folder. I'll need to verify everything. I've already sent the packet to probate review and Mr. Pollard, you're behind. He looked down. May I speak to Marissa? Of course. She's waiting in the garden. Just be prepared. He left the room. I watched from the study window as he approached her. She smiled, took his hand. He spoke. Her smile froze, then fell. She turned toward the house but didn't come inside. Instead, she walked slowly toward her car. For the first time, she didn't hum. Not a single note. That night, the house was silent. No music, no humming, no sound of Marissa's slippers sliding across the tile floor like usual. She didn't come down for dinner, didn't say goodnight, didn't even close her door. I passed by once just to check. She was sitting on the edge of her bed in her silk robe, still and statue-like, her phone glowing in her hand. She didn't look up. I walked away. The next morning, everything felt changed. Not by force, but by gravity. Like the room had shifted, like truth had tilted the foundation just enough to make walking feel uneven. Dad was awake, more alert than I'd seen him in weeks. When I walked into his room, he reached out slow, shaky fingers closing around my wrist. Is it done? He whispered. I leaned down. It's starting. He nodded. That was all. Later that afternoon, Marissa finally came to find me. She knocked once, then entered the guest room without waiting for a reply. I know what you did, she said, standing rigid by the door. I looked up from my laptop. You'll have to be more specific. She took a deep breath. You sent the file to Liam and to probate. You're trying to undo everything. I closed the lid of my computer. No, I said calmly. I'm correcting everything. Her hands tightened at her sides. You think anyone will care about some old folder and a shaky video? I think the courts will. I think your reputation will. And I think you know that. She stepped forward. Do you think you're the only one who loved him? I was there. Evelyn. Every day. While you were off chasing careers and designing skylines. I was here. I made him smoothies when he couldn't eat. I held his hand when he forgot where he was. And in between that, I said, rising to my feet. You filed documents in his name, rewrote his will, and booked a beach vacation with a man half his age. That stopped her. For a second, I saw something falter, but only for a second. She smiled, slow and poisonous. You think people will believe you? Poor, grief-stricken daughter suddenly reappears just in time to inherit millions. That's your story? No, I replied. My story is simpler. I'm the one with evidence. You're the one with secrets. Her face flushed. I built this life. I nodded. And now I'm dismantling it. She turned and stormed out. That evening, I received a call from the estate mediator. We've reviewed the materials, she said. The will you presented is valid. The video, along with the forensic testimony, is more than compelling. We're putting an emergency stay on all property transfers until a formal hearing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Then I asked, will she be notified? Yes, immediately. By the next morning, it had started. The silence in the house wasn't just quiet anymore, it was charged, like a thunderstorm waiting in the walls. Marissa began avoiding me. She moved like a ghost, eating meals in her room, whispering to someone on the phone late at night. I didn't care, because word was spreading. Liam dropped her as a client. The probate officer flagged her filings, and the lawyer who notarized those false documents, he resigned. I received a letter from his office admitting procedural misconduct under client pressure. It was over, or at least, the first battle was. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread. The first to call me was Dr. Pollard, my father's longtime physician. I've been contacted by the court, he said, voice clipped. They've requested all of Gerald's medical evaluations from the past 6 months, especially during the notary week. I confirmed I'd already sent him my copies. He sighed. Marissa told me he was of clear mind during that period. But the records, they don't lie. I know, I said. And neither do the recordings. He paused. She's not going to let this go quietly. I don't expect her to, and she didn't. That afternoon, a courier arrived with an envelope addressed to me, no return name. Inside was a typed letter, cold, precise. If you continue to interfere with the legal execution of Gerald Harper's estate, I will be forced to pursue legal action for slander, fraud, and emotional harm. Cease all communication with court-appointed representatives. This is your final warning. No signature. But I didn't need one. I burned the letter, not for fear, but for closure. 2 hours later, the investigator I'd hired called again. I thought you'd want to know Marissa has listed a secondary property in Maine under her sister's name. It was quietly transferred last year, not declared in any probate filings. She hid an asset. Looks like it. And now, listed for sale. Quiet auction. Closed list of buyers. I smiled. She was panicking. Selling off assets under false names to protect herself or escape him. And that meant she was ready to run. But I wasn't done yet. That evening, I visited my father's best friend Bernard Royce again. He handed me an old shoebox. She sent this to me last year, he said. Said it was from Gerald. That he wanted me to store it. But something felt wrong. He never mailed anything without a note. Inside the box were framed photos of Marissa and my father, vacation shots, anniversary dinners, all pristine, all staged. Each image bore the same timestamp on the back, same day, same hour, photoshopped memories. She was fabricating history. I asked Bernard if he'd testify to receiving the box. He didn't hesitate. I saw her destroy the real photos in the fire pit behind the guest house. Didn't know why. Now I do. I added his name to the list of witnesses. The case was no longer just about a forged will. It was about manipulation, psychological abuse, control. I returned home late that night to find Marissa waiting in the living room. She was seated on the armrest of the couch, like a guest who didn't belong. There was a half-empty glass of white wine in her hand. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," she said without looking at me. "No," I replied. "Not yet." She laughed, bitter. "You think they'll all see you as the hero? Poor Evelyn. Back from the city to save Daddy's legacy. I don't need to be the hero," I said calmly. "I just need the truth to win." She stood up slowly, like something in her cracked. "You ruined everything. My life, my name, You did that," I said, stepping closer. "I just turned the lights on." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't understand what it's like to build a life from nothing. To marry a man who barely sees you. To be judged by his perfect daughter. No one asked you to be perfect," I said. "Only honest." She walked toward me, stopping inches away. For a moment, I thought she might scream, or cry, or slap me. Instead, she whispered, "He never really loved you. You know, you were just the one who came first." I stared into her eyes, and yet, I'm the one still standing. She stepped back, silent, pale, then turned and left the room. That night, I got an alert. The emergency court hearing was confirmed. 3 days from now, she would have to appear, face the evidence, answer for every signature. And when it was done, not just the estate, but every hidden lie she'd built, it would all collapse. Not with rage, but with silence. The kind that exposes, the kind that ends stories like hers. It was 3, dozia, meme. When the nurse woke me, soft knock, gentle voice. "Miss Harper, it's time." I already knew. I'd been sitting in the hallway outside my father's room for hours, unable to sleep, watching the minutes crawl past like ghosts. When I stepped in, the machines were quiet. His eyes were closed, peaceful, still, and for the first time in weeks, he looked like himself. Not frail, not fading, just still. I took his hand, kissed the back of it, and whispered, "You can rest now, Dad. I'll finish the fight." The nurse gave me space. Marissa wasn't there. Of course she wasn't. She hadn't sat with him in days, not since the court summons had been served. She was too busy managing damage control, too busy hiding. At 6, throw up. I called Bernard. "He's gone," I said. "I know," he replied, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "Let me know when you're ready." I sent the texts. I made the calls. I handled the arrangements. Marissa, for once, didn't protest. She didn't try to take over. She didn't even show up to the funeral home until the final hour dressed in all black. Oversized sunglasses, red lipstick like armor. I thought he'd want something simple, I said to the director. She overheard me and cut in. Gerald loved tradition. We should do something elegant. Maybe at the estate? I turned to her, voice calm. He signed papers last year requesting a private cremation and burial next to my mother. Her face froze. He changed his mind, she said. No, I replied. You did. She said nothing more. The day of the memorial, the chapel was quiet. No press, no spectacle, just a few close friends. One retired business partner, Bernard, and me. Marissa sat 2 pews behind alone. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She didn't approach me. After the service, as people filtered out, one woman I didn't recognize approached. Soft coat, kind eyes, a quiet strength in her step. You must be Evelyn. I'm Margaret Lyons. I was your father's nurse before Marissa hired the private team. My pulse shifted. She leaned in. He trusted me, left a letter for you, told me to give it only after he passed. She reached into her bag and handed me a sealed envelope. My Evelyn, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and I hope you've already found the truth. I couldn't stop her, not the way I wanted, but I knew you would. You were always the one who saw past the smiles. Don't let anger eat you. Win, but with grace. Not for revenge. For clarity. For peace. I'm proud of you. Always, Dad. I folded the letter, pressed it to my chest, and walked outside into the cold, clean air. Later that evening, I returned home. The house felt unfamiliar. The furniture hadn't changed. The photos were still staged, but it was no longer hers. I walked into his study and sat at his desk, opened the drawer. There, under a copy of Forbes magazine, was the framed photo of us from when I was 10. Me sitting on his shoulders, both of us laughing. She'd tried to remove it once. He'd hidden it instead. A knock came. I turned. It was Marissa. No sunglasses, no performance, just a face tired, raw, and scared. He's really gone, she whispered. I said nothing. She stepped in further. You've taken everything, Evelyn. No, I said. I've taken back what was already mine. She walked over to the fireplace, touched the mantle. He loved me. I didn't argue. Maybe, in his own way, but he trusted me. Her voice cracked. What happens now? I stood. You show up in court. You answer questions. You face what you did. She looked at me hollow. And after that, I didn't blink. You disappear? The courtroom was colder than I expected. Muted walls, no windows, just dark wood, dull carpet, and the low hum of overhead lighting. It didn't feel like justice. It felt like waiting. Marissa sat on the opposite bench, flanked by her new lawyer, a young, polished woman in a navy suit, scrolling through her tablet like this was just another client meeting. She didn't look at me. Fine. I didn't need her to. The judge arrived promptly at 10. SECRETYL, gray hair, clear eyes, no nonsense. Probate case number 7345C, Harper Estate. We're here today to review contested documentation regarding the final will and testament of Gerald A. Harper. He looked over his glasses at both sides. I have reviewed the preliminary materials, but I want verbal testimony, and I want clarity, no theatrics. That last part felt like it was meant for Marissa. The first to speak was the estate attorney from the court. He presented both wills. One, the revised version that left nearly everything to Marissa. The other, my father's original will, filed 2 years prior, dividing assets between me and several charities he supported. Then came the video. The courtroom watched in silence as my father, seated in his reading chair, stated clearly, "This is Gerald Harper. I am of sound mind and body. I reaffirm that my last will and testament dated July 10th remains my true intent." He blinked slowly. I love my wife. But this is not about love. This is about what's right. Evelyn, if you're seeing this, I trust you. More than you know. I watched Marissa from the corner of my eye. Her expression didn't change, but her hands clenched. The judge turned to her. Mrs. Harper, you submitted an alternate will. Can you explain its origin? Her lawyer stood. Your Honor, the revised will was dictated by Mr. Harper verbally, transcribed in good faith, and signed in the presence of witnesses. And these witnesses, the judge asked. They were members of the in-home care team, she said, which was hired by Mrs. Harper. The judge nodded. And has this will been notarized through an independent party? A pause. No, Your Honor. Then why was it filed as the primary? Because it reflected Mr. Harper's spoken wishes. My lawyer stood. Your Honor, we have proof that during the time the revised will was supposedly dictated, Mr. Harper was under strong medication, with cognitive assessments indicating early-stage dementia. Furthermore, we have statements from Dr. Pollard and Nurse Margaret Lyons confirming he was not in condition to consent to any legal document. The judge leaned back. I've read these. They are persuasive. Then I spoke. I found the original will locked in a safe, along with documents Marissa tried to destroy. I also recovered digital recordings, emails from her financial advisor, and photographic evidence of concealed assets. I handed over the printed file. The judge skimmed, then turned to Marissa. Mrs. Harper, do you dispute the claims that assets were transferred to your sister under false filings? Her lawyer started to speak, but Marissa interrupted. I did what I had to do. Silence. Gerald was slipping. He didn't know what he wanted anymore. I was there every day. I made the decisions. I carried the burden. And that gave you the right, the judge asked, to rewrite his will and hide property. I protected our life. I stood. You protected your future. You erased mine. She turned to me. You had already moved on, Evelyn. You weren't part of this life anymore. I stared at her. My name was still on his heart, even when he couldn't remember dates. He remembered me. Her lawyer tried to steer her back, but it was too late. The judge lifted a hand. I've heard enough. He stood, gathering his papers. I will review everything one final time. My decision will be filed within 48 hours. Until then, all estate actions remain frozen. With a bang of the gavel, the session was over. Marissa looked at me for the first time that day, not with hatred, but with something else, something colder. Loss. Because she knew what I knew. She'd already lost. Not because of law, not because of paperwork, but because no one in that room believed her anymore. And when belief dies, control dies with it. I didn't sleep for the next 2 nights. I'd lie down, close my eyes, count the seconds. But my mind kept looping, not just over the hearing, not just over what Marissa said, but over Dad's letter. Don't let anger eat you. Win, but with grace. What did grace even mean in a world where someone rewrote a man's legacy? Where a woman like Marissa could smile through lies and still feel entitled to sympathy? I sat on the porch of the estate, sipping coffee that had gone cold. Bernard called at 8:01 a.m. They've posted it. I was already refreshing the probate court website. It took 5 tries. Then it loaded. Case outcome. The court recognizes the July 10th last will and testament of Gerald A. Harper as the valid, binding document. All subsequent filings are deemed fraudulent and void. Mrs. Marissa Harper is ordered to return all assets transferred under the invalid will. Further investigation into perjury and asset concealment is underway. I read it again, and again, and again. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because finally, after everything, truth had weight. Marissa wasn't home when I returned, but her closet was half empty, drawers open, luggage gone. I walked through the house, absorbing every detail. The hallway she'd redecorated to erase Mom's photos. The room she turned into a yoga studio. The kitchen drawer where she kept her vitamin pills next to Dad's prescriptions. All of it hers and not hers. I called the security firm. Initiate the lock change, I said. I paused. And cancel the private driver account under her name. It took less than 4 hours to reset the house. The attorney emailed shortly after noon. The court's ruling allows you to assume full management of the Harper estate. We recommend changing account signers and notifying all financial institutions within the week. I wrote back, already started. Then came the final letter. From Marissa. Typed. Signed. No lipstick this time. Evelyn. I won't apologize. You wouldn't believe it if I did. But I will say this. I never planned to take everything. Just enough. Enough to survive. Enough to be remembered. You were always his legacy. I just wanted a piece of it. I folded the letter in half, then in half again, then dropped it into the fireplace. No flames needed. Just silence. By nightfall, the house was mine. Not because I'd taken it, but because no one else could claim it anymore. I wandered through the library, pausing at Dad's reading chair, sat down, let the quiet settle. Then I whispered. I kept my promise. And for the first time since he died, I let myself cry, not out of grief, but out of relief. 1 week later, I stood at the edge of my father's garden. It was early morning, still dew on the leaves, still quiet in the house. The hydrangeas he planted for my mother were blooming again. I'd almost forgotten how blue they got in late spring. There was no victory dance, no dramatic monologue, no news headlines or vindication parade, just stillness, and the freedom to breathe again. Marissa was gone. I didn't chase her. Didn't need to. The authorities had opened an investigation. If she was found guilty of fraud and perjury, she'd lose her share of the trust, even the minor clause my father left for peacekeeping. But I never checked in on her again. Because the real revenge wasn't court rulings, wasn't asset seizures. It was the quiet, the silence that came after a storm, when nothing else needed to be said. She no longer lived in the house. She no longer shaped the narrative. She no longer mattered. One afternoon, I returned to my childhood bedroom. It had been untouched for years. Same posters on the walls, same worn bookshelf, same dusty photo frame beside the lamp Dad and I at the science fair. I sat cross-legged on the carpet and opened a shoebox of old letters. One was from my mother, written before she passed, addressed to Evelyn. When you're ready. You won't be able to stop people from lying, baby, but you can stop them from defining you. I smiled, because she was right. In the end, I chose what kind of daughter I wanted to be, what kind of woman I would become. Months passed. The estate was restructured. Charities received their promised donations. A scholarship fund in my father's name was established. The staff returned, familiar faces, loyal ones. Bernard and I had coffee every Sunday. Sometimes we said nothing. Sometimes we reminisced. Sometimes we just sat. One day, as we watched the sunset over the vineyard, he said, "You never raised your voice." I looked at him. He smiled. "That's how I knew you'd win. Because real strength doesn't scream. It stands. It waits. It outlasts. And when the time is right, it speaks. Not to destroy, but to correct. To anyone listening right now, if someone tried to rewrite your story, if someone painted you as the villain in a narrative you never chose, let them speak, let them twist. Then stand in your truth and wait. Because eventually, silence will speak louder than everything they said. And you'll still be standing. Each episode is a slow burn of suspicion, sorrow, and strength. And when justice finally comes, it doesn't knock. It shatters. Are you ready to listen to the next voices that were silenced? Subscribe now to step into tales where the wounds are real, the pain is raw, and the revenge is unforgettable.